Like, my guess is what you're referring to as archaeological evidence, right? All right, so who did you say brought up the thing about SpiderMan fallacy? Karsten?
I did because, I had like a video.
Okay.
Talking back and forth for more context.
Okay, yeah, so there's actually a really good YouTube video by a guy who I think on his YouTube handle is Testify, I think. Have you ever seen it?
So what happened was you sent links on the evidence first, the archaeological things, like Pilot Stone and
Sure.
all that stuff. And you were saying, like, would this be something good to bring up with them? And I said, well, I think it's good corroborating evidence. It's not the full picture, that you can, extrapolate to a full case. But what usually comes up is the SpiderMan fallacy, where they'll say that, and then I sent the Testify video to you, and that's his response.
Right. Now, what's cool about that? Well, what's cool about it is it's just a good video already. Like, he does a good job on it. But there's something really neat about it, too, is I responded to that video at some point. I don't remember when it was. And he pinned my response. So if you go and look at one of those, it's on there somewhere. One of his. So, but anyway, it's either that. It's either I'm pretty sure it's that one. But maybe there's another one about correlation between soul and mind and brain activities or something. One of those two that he pinned. But anyway, yeah, sometimes people will charge that there's, hey, look, man, just because you can prove New York City exists and blah, it doesn't mean Spider-Man exists, right? But the problem with that is, because if you're trying, you can't dismiss the argument. But then this is basically what I say in the Spider-Man fallacy thing, right? Or my response on the Spider-Man fallacy thing, is that someone will try to say it's a Spider-Man fallacy because you're listing out, hey, look, we found the stone that mentions Pontius Pilate, we found all these sorts of things, right? But nobody is claiming that therefore Christianity is true as a whole because you found these archaeological data pieces, right, or pieces of data. Well, then why is it useful? Well, because if you didn't find anything, then that would be highly problematic. Do we have any examples of this? Yes. Like Mormonism, right? Like if our Mormon friends were back here, like that's highly problematic for Mormonism because sure, if you found whatever it says that exists or whatever, it wouldn't prove Mormonism. But Mormonism also claims things that you should be able to find that aren't there. That's highly problematic. So in terms of Christianity, right, it would be a problem if there was never any evidence of all that say Jerusalem existed, obviously. That's just an obvious one. But it'd be a problem if things like Pontius Pilate, right, if things like particular locations and places within the New Testament, like another popular one was the pool of, the pool of Bethesda, I think. One of the, or maybe it's the pool of Siloam. Anyway, right, Siloam, right. All right, so those types of things, right, while they don't necessarily prove the overall case for Christianity, they do prove that the people that are around during that time knew what they were talking about, right? Now, and again, that would be highly problematic if they were making claims. Let's say I make claims about something that happens in Carrollton, right? And I'm like, yeah, it was over there by the Chick-fil-A, over by where this event took place at the Chick-fil-A, close to the. I'm trying to think of a name of a business on the square. Close to Gallery Row on the square. Well, why would that be problematic? Right. So if you came along 500 years later and you were like, well, wait a minute. There's not a Chick-fil-A on the square by Gallery Row, right? Well, then that immediately falsifies, or at least calls into question that I know what I'm talking about, right? But what if 500 years later or 2,000 years later, right, you don't know anything about Carrollton and you're reading this account, right, where I say, hey, the Gallery Road that was on the square in Carrollton, blah, 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 blah. Well, that doesn't mean necessarily that what I'm saying is true yet, but it does show that I actually know what? That I'm actually in Carrollton as an eyewitness, or at least I have access to somebody that is, right? And so that's valuable. And so when someone tries to toss out the Spider-Man fallacy, it's kind of like, look, man, like you're completely missing the point of the argument. Nobody's saying that it completely proves Christianity, but it's a strong corroborating piece of data that you would expect to see that's true, right? And again, we know that's valuable because, again, the same people that would try to argue against Christianity would use that against Mormonism, which we think should be used against Mormonism. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say like, well, look, nothing here is Mormonism's faults, like, and then get on to Christians because they're actually showing you stuff that is around. Well, that didn't prove Christianity, right? But it was good enough to disprove Mormonism, right? Was it not? Yeah. Well, then obviously it helps to establish the reliability of, say, like the New Testament documents at the very least, right? Which it should. But yeah, there's also if there's a little book. And actually, in this book, it's just an excerpt from another book. But there's a little book, and I'll write it up here. I mean, it's literally the easiest thing to remember of all time. But the book is called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist." Yeah. I don't have enough. And this is one, I don't like this title. I think this title is, I mean, I get it. I mean, it's supposed to be provocative, but I kind of don't like it. But then, two, it's just long, and it takes forever to write. I don't have enough faith. Right. To be an atheist, right? I mean, look at how long this is. But at least that way, you can pick up that book because that book has a lot of those archaeological aspects in that book, just from the last couple chapters of Acts. I think it goes through even some of those things in John, but it goes through like just the last few chapters of Acts, and it lists out something like 80 something plus, I'll just put 80 plus, 80 something plus of those particular facts that are found just in the book of Acts alone. And some of those are pretty crazy. I mean, literally, like even the depth of the sound, where whichever, I mean, we have Puget Sound, right? Like whatever the sound is where Luke's saying there's measurements of the depths of the water there, those are accurate. Like, just all kinds of crazy little things like that. Then again, by themselves don't prove anything other than that the guy's an eyewitness or has access to eyewitnesses, right? But anyway, that book has a lot of that stuff in it. And that's one of the most lay-friendly books that you can get for an overall type apologetic for the Christian faith. It's very easy to understand, very lay-friendly, but it's got some substantial information in it too. One of the kind of the good/bad things about the internet nowadays is you can literally get on YouTube, type in that book, and literally it'll be like 900 people debunking quote-unquote information out of it. What drives me nuts about that is like somebody that's, interested in philosophy, right, that teaches philosophy, I can look at the first couple chapters because the first couple chapters are almost all philosophical, like law of non-contradiction stuff, that kind of thing. And literally the same guy that's debunking every chapter in the book is also debunking that kind of stuff. Which, if you're in the know, it shows you, dude, this guy isn't necessarily interested in pursuing truth. He's literally just trying to discredit anything these guys say just because they're Christians. Like the last thing that any sort of atheistic logician should be doing is trying to debunk the law of non-contradiction. Right? So anyway, just be careful about that. But there's a lot of good information that's simple but substantial just in that book to kind of develop your overall apologetic.
This is Frank Turner book too, right? He's apologetic, like Christian apologetic.
It is. He co-authored that with a dude named Norman Geisler. And Norman Geisler is like a legit philosopher. So I like Frank Turek, but he co-wrote that with kind of one of his mentors, which was Norman Geisler.
Yeah, I've seen like a bunch of his debates too.
Right. Right. Yeah. He's got a lot of. Yeah, he's got a lot of stuff where he answers, kind of just, standard objections that you hear on a daily basis at college campuses and that kind of thing. Yeah. Now I would disagree with some of the things that he says. I think that some of those things are a little surface level, but I think that the vast majority of it's good stuff, real good stuff. What else? Or just even in regard to that, like, we can keep going with something like that if you have a question about it. Did you have anything in regards to what we were talking about last week? Anything that came up that kind of tangled you up, or that you're like, well, what about this? Or I want to hear more about that thing that guy brought up, or, that kind of thing.
While you're looking here, one thing that stuck out to me was when Alan said that they take the position, or at least he does, that atheism is a negative claim.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
That was a red flag there. So
Now we're really about to go into professor mode right here.
Yeah, here we go. Did you catch that, Eric?
Yeah, explain to him, just real quickly.
What's your perception of that when they say it's a negative claim?
What, atheism?
Atheism is a negative claim. What does that mean to you when they say that?
kind of like, more of like a society not norms, kind of like like something you would turn away from. Kind of like atheism is like associated with like these like non-moral people and like these evil people and stuff like that. So kind of like a negative type of way, a negative like term connected to it.
All right, so that's not what he means. All right, so when you hear this word atheist, right? Last week, right, this dude claims, our friend claims that, well, when he says that he's an atheist, what he means, he's not making a claim necessarily about reality in some sense. So usually, what do you think of what does this term mean to you?
Someone who doesn't believe in God.
Somebody doesn't believe in God, but even more specifically, what?
Doesn't believe in like afterlife or the Bible.
They don't believe in any supernatural.
Right. So let's do it this way first then. A theist, what does that term mean to you?
Believes in a creator or God.
Somebody that believes in a personal type of God, right? But it's more than that, right? Usually what we want to define that as somebody that holds to the truth of the proposition that God exists, right? So it's not only somebody that believes in God, it's also someone that's committed to the truth of the proposition that God actually exists, right? So usually the old school definition of this word atheist was somebody that held to the truth of the proposition that God didn't exist, that there wasn't a God. Glad you brought this up, Carson, because I actually wanted to talk about this. I wanted to bring it up then, but the conversation kind of kept rolling. And then I wanted to bring it up today, and I kind of forgot about it, so I'm really glad you brought it back up. So this claim that atheism, right, there's two versions of this. Let's just do them like this first. Atheism, and I really wish Alan was here to talk about this. So there's atheism, quote unquote, and there's atheism. Why do I have these in quotations? Because there's a new school, what I like to call the revisionist version of atheism, and there's an old school version of atheism. You're familiar with the old school version. The old school version would say something like this: God doesn't what? God doesn't exist, right? That's something like the old school version is there is no God. God doesn't exist, right? Or we could say it this way: an atheist is someone that's holding to the truth of the proposition that there is no God or that God doesn't exist. That's kind of the old school version of that.
That's a positive claim.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And you're about to see that. You're about to see that.
Yeah.
This version is this version will say that atheism just means this: a lack of belief in God. Now, I'm going to try to set you up here, almost a trick question. These basically are saying the same thing, right? There is no God, and this is and atheism is a lack of belief in God, right? They're basically saying the same thing, right? No. These are two radically different claims. These are radically different claims. That's why I have this one in quotations, atheism, and then this one is not, right? Just regular atheism. Well, why? Roughly in the mid-1900s, right, you have a very prominent philosopher of religion who's also an atheist. And he was a good, for the most part, I would say, even though I disagree with him, obviously. He's a good philosopher of religion, but his name was Antony Flew. And what he did was this: he basically revised the definition of atheism. Because let's say that I tell you, right? Let's say I tell you that there's a pink elephant on the other side of that wall over there. I've made a claim, right? Now, whose job is it then? Who bears the burden of proof if someone makes a claim? Who bears the burden of proof to show that their claim is true? The person that makes the claim, right? Like if I tell you, there's a purple elephant or a pink elephant on the other side of that wall right there. You could look at me and be like, why should I believe that? Right? Russ, you made the claim, so it's up to you to show me that that's true, right? Now, in debate circles, right, this was an ingenious move for Antony Flew to redefine atheism as just a lack of belief in God. Because if you say you believe in God, right, you say there's a God, and you say, Russ, what do you know? I'm an atheist. And you're like, what do you mean atheist? And I'm like, I just don't have a belief in God. Do I have to give you an argument? Why not?
I mean, because it's your denial of God.
I haven't made a claim, have I?
Oh,
So if I were to say, hey man, I'm an atheist, and you're like, what do you mean? I was like, there is no God. You could do what to me?
Come back with my claim.
Or you could say, why should I believe that? Because I've made it. When I say there is no God, have I made a claim?
Right,
Yes, I've made a positive claim about the way reality is, right? But what if I say, I'm an atheist, and that just means I don't have a belief in God. I just lack a belief in God. Have I made a claim about reality?
I mean, you make a claim kind of like just about yourself.
That's exactly right. So these are radically different claims, right? So if our friend was to say, well, man, like, I haven't made a claim about reality, so I don't have to give you an argument as to why there's no God. I just lack a belief in God. I don't have any reason to believe in God. But if I'm a theist, right, up here, and I say there is a God, well, then now all of a sudden I shoulder all of the burden of proof because now I have to give you an argument. Does that make sense? You see how in debate circles, this is a very good move, so to speak. Does that make sense?
Right.
Now, even though that's a good move, that's highly problematic. And we're going to look at why. And I literally just went over this in my philosophy class when we started talking about these topics. Because, I mean, man, look, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on this stuff, and philosophy is philosophy. And so you can analyze and look at different terms. I mean, everything's fair game, right? Now there's a couple problems with redefining atheism as something like just a lack of belief.
They may use the term black theism in
Right.
some circles. It's the same thing.
Right, so if atheism, we're going to put equals, because they're saying basically this just is atheism, right? Atheism is a lack of belief in God, right? There's going to be some problems with that. Well, one, it proves, if that's your definition of atheism, then it proves way too much. Well, how so? All right, so in the history of philosophy, there's like this famous story of Plato, right? And they're trying to come down to what does it mean to be a human? Like, what is a human being? So they're trying to define that, right? And what that meant back in the day is they're trying to find the nature or the essence of what it means to be human. So they're going through this, they're going through this, they're going through this. And finally, Plato comes up with this definition. He says, a human is, by definition, a featherless biped, right? Biped is something that walks on 2 feet, right? A human, by definition, is a featherless biped, right? And so, one of his students, right, in effort to, one up their teacher, runs out, gets a chicken, right, plucks all of the feathers out of the chicken, runs back in and tosses it into the thing, says, behold, Plato's man, right? Because is that a featherless biped? Well, right, yeah, it is, right? So that definition proves too much, because nobody wants to say human is that too, right? That's what the first difficulty that we have here is that it proves too much. How so? All right, if an atheist, well, technically we're talking about atheism, but let's talk about atheist. If an atheist just is, right, a lack of belief in God, right, if that's what atheism is, and we have an atheist, well then my cat Charlotte is an atheist. Because for all we know, what? She lacks a belief in God, right? But also, so is this eraser. Because this eraser lacks a belief in God, right? But that doesn't seem to make any sense to say that this eraser is an atheist. Or that this marker is an atheist because it lacks belief in God. Or that my cat Charlotte is an atheist for all we know, right? That table, right? That rain jacket, this trash can, whatever else. Like, that doesn't seem to make any sense to say that that's an atheist, right? So let's say, well, okay, it proves too much. Well, let's just say that it's a person that has a lack of belief in God. Let's try to help it out. Well, yeah, that's ridiculous. Nobody wants to say it's a person that has a lack of belief in God, right? Okay, well, let's just go with that for a second. That's going to run our second problem. If a person has a lack of belief in God, right? What does it mean for theism to be true? What does it mean if theism is true? What's that?
They're wrong.
Well, if theism is true, that just means that there is a what?
Okay.
Right, you're right. That God exists, right? Now, this is what's called a reductio ad absurdum argument, right? Let's say that you're an atheist. What is atheism on this new view? What is it?
On what?
On this new view, the revised view, what is an atheist?
Lack of,
Somebody that lacks a belief in God, right? Now, can God actually exist and atheism be true? On this view?
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Why?
Because it basically, God can still exist even if you don't believe in him.
Right, like you could be an atheist and atheism be true. If atheism is a lack of belief in God, well then atheism can be true and God be true. So, in other words, theism is true and atheism is true at the same time. Right? But that seems to be absurd. Right? Right, wait a minute. That doesn't seem to make any sense. All right. But it actually gets worse. So, lack of belief in God, that could be true and theism be true, right, at the same time. But it actually gets much worse than this, right? And here's why. If atheism just is a lack of belief in God, so if I were to ask you, what is atheism, what would you say? A lack of belief in God. Is the statement, lack of belief in God, right, to kind of use the word statement a little loosely there. But if I were to say lack of belief in God, is that statement, lack of belief in God, is that true or false?
It's true.
Think of it this way. If I say lack of spaghetti, is that true or is that false? Is it?
You said a lack of it?
Lack of spaghetti. Right now, lack of spaghetti. Is that true or false?
I would say it would be true because it would be in me. If you say you're lacking that, it means you don't have that.
It's not true or false.
Okay.
Lack of spaghetti. Is that true or false? It's not true or false unless I predicate it of something, right? Like if I say this table has a lack of spaghetti, that can be true or false, right? Because I've predicated lack of spaghetti, I've given it a subject, right? But if atheism is a lack of belief in God, is that true or false? It's not true or false. There's no content to it. There's no truth value to that. So literally, if this is what atheism is, then atheism can't even be true or false. Because there's no truth content to it. It's not describing anything about reality. Right? You have to actually help it and predicate it. You're going to have to actually predicate it of something before it can even be true or false. Otherwise, it can't even be true or false. It's like Satan running around saying, lack of spaghetti, true or false? I don't know. Like, there's nothing that's predicated of yet, right? So that's actually the worst aspect about it, is it literally doesn't even have the respectability to be true or false, because it's not, again, if it's that by definition, then it can't be true or false. So let's jump back up here real quickly. Let's say we predicated of a person, Dan, has lack of belief in God, right? Well, one, theism and atheism can be true at the same time, right? But here's another problem about it. Dan has a lack of belief in God, or you're an atheist, right? You have a lack of belief in God. What have you said about reality?
That it's an accident.
Or you've said nothing about reality, have you? You've only said something about what? Your psychology. You've only made a statement about your psychology. Because you're not telling me anything about reality. You're telling me about you, right? About your statement of psychology. Well, if that's what atheism is, well then theism would just be a statement about my own psychology. If theism, use it for theism. When a theist says, "I'm a theist," are they only saying that they believe in God? Well, yeah, they're saying that, but they're also saying something more than that. What?
What basically God lines up what we see.
Right, that God exists. Right? They're saying, not only am I saying I believe in God, but I'm committed to the truth of the proposition that God exists, right? If atheism is true, and that's what atheism is, you're not even saying anything about philosophy, or about reality, I should say. You're just talking about your own personal psychology. Well, who cares? That's like running around saying, I like red shirts. Okay, awesome, but that's just a statement about your own personal psychology, not anything that's philosophically interesting at that point. Now, here's another critique that way back in the day that I used to use when I first heard about this. And we could argue about this one, but I still think it's legitimate in some sense. If someone says I'm an atheist because I have a lack of belief in God and therefore I don't have any sort of burden of proof or whatever, my question would be, why do you not have a belief in God? Well, what are they going to start doing? start giving you reasons. And then you can jump right into, well, are those good reasons or those bad reasons? Does that make sense? So it's kind of like when people say like, well, I'm an atheist for the same reason that you're not a Santa Claus guy, right? Like you just have a lack of belief in Santa Claus. But see, that's not true. Why? Because there are reasons you don't believe in Santa Claus. It's not just an absence of belief. You've got positive justification, or just shouldn't say justification really, but you've got positive reasons that you don't believe in Santa Claus. Namely, you know something about the nature of time, right, and how that works. You know something about whether or not reindeer can or can't fly. You know something about the dynamics of what it would take to fly in a certain direction at a certain altitude in a freezing climate wearing nothing but a coat, right? Like you know all of the, like there's reasons even then as to why that aren't just deflections of some sort of belief in Santa Claus. Like you've got positive reasons why you don't believe something like that, right? So in my view, it's like, even if somebody's like, well, I'm just going to stick to this anyway, atheism and lack of beliefs. Okay, well, why? Why are you an atheist? Well, now we're just back into the conversation that needs to be had anyway, right? So I'm glad you brought that up, Carson, about the whole lack of belief thing, because that drives me bonkers.
That caught me off guard. I didn't think that he had that view, that Alan had that view, but that's what he's going with.
Right, well, and plus too, I don't want to, because they're not here, so I don't want to straw man any particular position, but sometimes it just makes me wonder what they have or haven't been exposed to, especially since this is recorded, because I record all of these just in case we ever need them again. You literally so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But at the same time, so I want to be careful because this is being recorded, but it really does kind of make me sometimes wonder what they've been exposed to. Like, I've never heard anything in regards to the problem of evil. Like,
sure.
That, I just don't, like academically speaking, like, there's a reason that people don't give the logical problem anymore. That's why it's dropped back to the evidential or probable argument, because the logical problem's been, for the most part, just conceded, so.
It just made me wonder. It's nothing personal.
Sure, yeah.
But it was a little bit surprising. So.
Right.
One other term that they used was one of the other people said that they identified as an antitheist in comparison to an atheist. And that's like another step further than lack theism or atheism. So the antitheist view, we should probably have another talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's just know that there's a differentiation between what they're saying there, and they can explain a little bit more if they want to.
Right, and like Carson is saying, it would absolutely be better to let them kind of voice that. But going ahead and stepping out on them anyway, usually what that means is that you're not just, you disbelieve in God and you think that a belief in God is not the best rational case, right? That there are better reasons for not believing in God. But usually an antitheist is somebody that is almost adamantly angry about, say, belief in God. So it's not just that, hey, here's this academic, this intellectual question before us, and it's really important, and we're kind of, I think you're wrong, you think I'm wrong, but we'll have an argument about it, in the healthy sense of the word. But I think that something's wrong with you, like mentally, if you even believe these sorts of things, right? And at the very best, that religion itself is just absolutely atrocious, and it should be wiped off the face of the planet, at least in terms of a thinking option. I guess it shouldn't even be on the table, right? And I'm even trying to be nice here in the way that I say it, right?
It's just another step for previous, right? So, yeah.
Right. And I'm on it, and that was kind of a popular thing 10, 15 years ago, and so it kind of surprises me to hear somebody that would kind of hold to that now, because it's kind of waned away. It was one of those things that people just kind of saw it as so like just in your face that most people, even atheists, were kind of turned off by it, but it's out there, obviously. What else you got, Clark? Did you have anything in regards to like the Mormonism stuff?
Well, part of the thing that I caught with them was they were talking a lot about joy, a lot about happiness. One of the big evidential points they mentioned this time was that lasting joy and happiness is evidence for being a Mormon, in a sense of having the right belief in Mormonism. And so it made me wonder if negative emotion would be proof against their version of God. If you just have a negative emotion about yourself or about something else.
That's interesting, yeah.
Is that a negative qualifier there in a sense? If you're sad, if there's any negative emotion, however they would define that, how does that work?
Right, or what if, or are there any legitimately true Mormons that are depressed? You know, because if your argument for Mormonism is happiness and joy and all these sorts of things continually, well then, can it really be said that there should be any really depressed Mormons? If that's your argument that it's true, right? Because I think that we as Orthodox Christians, right, Orthodox little o there, but that we as classical Christians, right, Orthodox Christians, I think that we would say that we would hope, right, that that Christian faith would give you a robust sense of joy and peace and those sorts of things. But we would also be very quick to admit that you can be a for real legitimate Christian and struggle with things like depression and unhappiness and all those sorts of things. I mean, I've wrestled with those things, like big time. But remember, we're not the ones arguing that that's what proves our faith to be true. Because again, if you're arguing that's what proves your faith to be true, then you're in trouble if you don't have that, right?
Because you do see a lot of Christians arguing that even evangelistic stuff.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
Yes, you do.
You have a God-shaped emptiness in your heart, and God's the only one that can fill that. And then they go a step further and say that that will give you joy and peace and happiness. And then some might say wealth and prosperity and all these.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Then you're going to go even further and do health and wealth gospel or something. But I'm glad you bring that up because there's a lot of stuff. The evangelist, the popular evangelist, the Ray Comfort guy.
Yeah.
Like I'm not, I don't want to disparage your brother at all because I think he's absolutely wonderful. I just want to say I don't agree with a lot of his apologetic types of argumentation. But that's really neither here nor there. But what I think he's a good champion and advocate of is that people should come to Christ because they need to be saved, right? Because they see their need for salvation in light of the fact that before a holy, righteous God, that they're sinful. As opposed to what Carson is saying, you don't draw people in because of the benefits God can give you, right? Because then you really may not even be a true convert. That may just be a mask for our own selfishness. That if we're drawn in because God gives you peace and happiness and all these sorts of things, and man, I was a crackhead and I wanted to be off crack, so I came to Jesus to give him a shot kind of thing. Or you might not really be even a real convert. Right? Because did you come to God on his terms, or did you come on what you thought were your own kind of deal, right? So anyway, Ray Comfort, I think is, I want to, give him a, virtual high five, for that. I think that's one of the very strongest points of his evangelistic ministry is he wants to make sure that people know the truth about themselves, and then the truth about God, and then the truth about what they're like before God, right? And so, again, if that's a point for Mormonism to try to get people in for these other benefits, well, then really, what are you doing, kind of thing? And then, like to Carson's point, even evangelicals have done that. In fact, Comfort has a book called "God Has a Wonderful Plan for Your Life," and he has a book called "The Way of the Master" that basically destroy that entire concept of evangelism.
They're short too.
Yeah, they're pretty quick. I mean, they're kind of long. They're like 200 plus pages, but they read quickly.
Yeah, one of them is a little shorter.
Yeah, okay.
So did you have anything else from the topic with the LDS folks? I have one other thing with them, but I don't want to cut you out. Okay. You may have noticed, Eric, when they said they were kind of talking about the eternal destinations heaven, and then they justified that by saying there's truth in all religions. So,
and we slightly addressed that day.
A little bit about why there's a problem with that.
Do you ask them when, you saying when Alan asks, like,
Am I going to heaven?
Okay.
And then they say, well, there's truth in all religions. I wrote like, I think they appreciated it too, because it's so transparent. But what did you see? Because we kind of did talk about it, but what did you kind of gain from hearing that? Because that's something we hear a lot on campus and with friends and things like that. Like, how would you respond if I was saying, well, Eric, there's truth in all religions, man? Just, what do you think you would say now after hearing some of the discussions?
I think it's what you said. You said it's like, there's certain truths in religions, but it's not like, they're not 100% true. And if they're all different religions, so they're supposed to contradict each other in like some type of way. So it's like, they can say like, oh, apple is red and green, that's true, but it's like, it doesn't mean like, oh, everything else about your religion is true. Like what they said to believe that's true, right? But
So in philosophy, there's a word that's usually used for that, and it's this here. I know I have terrible handwriting, but it's uninteresting. like, that's just to say, like, okay, awesome, but who's arguing that? Like, nobody's arguing. I think the joke I made that day was something like, I mean, I didn't put it that way, but something, I think the joke was something like, you know, if religion X says don't stab your grandmother and religion Y says don't stab your grandmother, like, okay, fantastic, but who cares? Like, you know, we would expect there to be some overlap, right? But that's not where the concern is. The concern is kind of what you're getting at there is direct contradictions, right? Like, what do we do and how do we adjudicate between religious claims when there are direct contradictions? So again, if you go back to that book, I don't have no faith to be atheist book, they do something very, very well here where they point out that, yes, there's all sorts of superficial commonalities between religions, right? Again, like, hey, my religion says help old ladies across the street. Awesome, so does mine. Oh, they're both true. No, right? Well, there's all kinds of superficial differences. The core of them are radically different. So, and then this is a good thing that book was out, but it says stuff like the nature of man, right? The nature of man, like, who are we? What are we? Like, religions are radically different on this issue. Say, for instance, Christianity, the nature of man is that we're basically what?
crazy.
Bad, right? We're crazy, right? You're going to say it a little nicer. And then the nature of God. I mean, this is obviously a huge one. The nature of God. Buddhism, right? If it even allows for a God. Hinduism, right? And the more pure forms of that. And then something like Christian theism. The nature of God, and those theistic conceptions would be that God is transcendent, separate from separate from creation, right? He's over and above creation in some sense, even though he's active in it. A lot of pantheistic religions would say that God is his creation. He is the universe, right? Like, that's God, I'm God, you're God, this is God, like that over there, God, right? That's radically different. It's the nature of God. Another big one, again, all of these religions, would be the nature of salvation. Like, how are you saved? Or how are you made right with God? Can you even be made right with God, right? So a lot of these other, well, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. Christianity, you can't do anything at all. You know, all these other, well, you got to meditate, or you got to release desire. You can't desire anything. You have to, like, radically different, right? Which would be problematic. Radically different, right? Nature of man, nature of God, nature of salvation. And then I think they go on to list like 7 different things, I think. And we could too, we won't for the sake of time, but that's the kind of stuff we're saying. So for instance, if we just went to the nature of God one, right? The nature of God right there, I think was number 2 or whatever. With the Mormons, is the nature of God that there's only one ultimate, end-all, be-all, right? Maker, sustainer of all that is, who has never not been, right? Or is God basically just like you on steroids, right? And then there was one before him, and one before him, and one before him. So, I mean, even in that, something like that, we're clearly not talking about, even though you're both using this word, this is why I get frustrated about this kind of stuff. Even though you're both using that word, you're not talking about the same thing. One of you is talking about some sort of philosophically necessary metaphysical being that can't not be, right? The word for that in philosophy is aseity, right? He exists by his own being, right? And another is saying, there's a God who had a God, who had a God, who had a God, who had a God, who had a God. These are clearly not the same thing. You're literally just using this word and not meaning the same thing at all by it. Same thing with Jesus. If we were talking about Mormons, like, which Jesus are you talking about, right? We have a radically different understanding of Jesus than Mormons do. Obviously, a radically different understanding of Jesus than atheists do, right? Because even if they concede that he exists, I mean, he's just a dude. I mean, at best, you know.
So because I thought they quoted something like Galatians or something like that. So do they have like truths, like do they believe like in parts of the Bible and then their Holy Testament?
Well, here's their key. They believe in the Bible. Do you want to finish the qualification?
Well, that it corrupt, or you know,
Right. Yeah, we believe in the Bible so long as it's accurately translated, right? So and surprise, surprise, anywhere it disagrees with their doctrine, and that's where it's not translated accurately.
Now, the trouble is if you ask them how it's been corrupted,
Right.
typically they'll go into this thing about the Council of Nicaea or something like
Right.
that. Yeah, that's a fun one. So,
Yeah, and even all of our manuscripts, you know,
predate that.
right.
And actually exist on manuscripts.
Now, there was something about the golden plate deal that really got me.
There are plates that have been found in mountains across the United States.
And I can honestly say I've heard almost every argument that our Mormons friends would use in regards to that, but I can honestly say I've never heard that one.
Me either.
So that's why I just straight up that day, because you'll catch me doing that. If somebody makes a claim, if I'm not familiar with it, a lot of times you'll hear me say like, why, like that day, like, wait a minute, why should I believe that? Because again, in our culture, we're used to kind of letting people, we'll let it slide. Somebody will make an assertion, and you're just like, let them go with, whoa, wait a minute, because it kind of goes back to what we were talking a minute ago. Wait a minute, if you make the claim, whose job? It's not my job to show it's wrong. It's your job to show. And I didn't want to do this that day, but he was like, well, just Google it. And I wanted to be like, it's not my job. I didn't make the claim. Like my claim, you made a claim that there's golden plates all over the place that people are finding. Like it's your job to show that that's true. It's not my job to go look it up or whatever. I didn't make that claim.
Yeah. Going on the nature of God, since we were just talking about that, a lot of the LDS conversation is kind of centered around misconceptions of the Trinity.
Yeah.
Picked up on a lot of that.
Yeah.
That's something I'm really trying to grow into. So, Russ, what would you have resource-wise that would be a good starting point? I've heard Forgotten Trinity, but that's about all
Yeah, that. I think you're talking about. I think you got two titles mixed up there. You're talking about. There's like a Francis Chan book called Forgotten God that's about the Trinity.
I've. No, I was talking about the James White one.
Yeah, but I think that's titled something else, or maybe it's not. Maybe that's the title. But yeah, he's got a book on it, right? If that's what you're referencing, then he's got a book on it too, and it may be called that.
Okay.
But yeah, he's got a book that's good on the Trinity. I'm trying to think of just a good, like just kind of substantial but lay-friendly source that's good on that. I know this is more pricey, but obviously any good systematic theology like Wayne Grudem's systematic theology is going to be good on the Trinity. I think that Norman Geisler's systematic theology is good on that when it gets to that aspect. I want to say even that little book called Doctrine. It was kind of like before Mark, what's his name, got in a lot of trouble. He kind of co-wrote a book with a theologian guy. Mark Driscoll, before he got in kind of all that, trouble, he kind of co-wrote a book with some dude, and it's called Doctrine. I want to say that they have a good section on Trinity, I think. Also, R.C. Sproul's got good stuff on the Trinity that's free on Kindle. Like a lot of that's just free. It'll say like, what is the Trinity or something like that. And again, I'm pretty sure that's just free on Kindle. So there's a lot of good resources on that. And it's really not that hard. I mean, here's the paradox. It's not hard to explain and understand, but it's impossible to conceive, like to fully conceive. Well, when I say impossible, I mean for us as finite beings. Not impossible in the sense that nobody can, obviously God can't, but It's really, really difficult. But what I really want to point out to people is that there's nothing logically incoherent about the Trinity. That's the key point. Because a lot of times people will say the Trinity is illogical and that'll be based off some sort of misconception about the Trinity. Now, obviously, I teach logic, right? So, and if I taught logic and the Trinity is completely illogical, then I've got a massive problem on my hands as a Christian. Either I'm going to have to deny logic, right? Which you can't do that. You literally can't do it without doing it. Or I'm going to have to deny Christianity, right? So thankfully, because God saved so many people back in the day that liked philosophy and logic, right? Like all these Greeks back in the day, like they've been working on this stuff forever, right? And so for the most part, the Trinity is just, I don't want to say just, I mean, the Trinity is like, we can't get it. But the Trinity is best explained usually by this triangle thing, right? So you've got like Jesus over here. You got the Father. And I don't mean to be sacrilegious, like I'm not trying to, like, you guys understand that, right? Holy Spirit, right? Here. And so, and then you've got these arrows here. I'm not the best artiste, right? So imagine another arrow. I'm just going to do them like this. And in these arrows it says is. So Jesus is God. The Father is God. The Holy Spirit is God, right? Now, the key point for us then is there's nothing illogical about saying that there's three who's. There's three who's. I'm just going to put that in parentheses. There's three who's and only one what. There's one what and three who's. Now, it would be contradictory and it would be illogical if we were to say there's one God and three gods. Right? That would be contradictory. Or if we were to say that there's only one person and three persons. Right? That's not the Trinity. The Trinity is that there's three persons, three personages, right? Three persons in one essence and with one nature. Right? Now, does that go against logic? No. Doesn't go. There's nothing illogical in saying three who's, one what, or three persons in one essence. But does that go beyond our ability to conceptually grasp? Yes. But here's why I think that's a good thing. Because if you're talking about, because remember, as Christians, we believe that God, is God finite or infinite? Right, he's not finite. Are you finite or are you infinite? We're finite, right? We're finite creatures. That means then if that's what we are by definition, and if God is by definition infinite, then you could never in principle comprehend the infinite, because then it wouldn't be infinite. Right? Because to comprehend means to go around something, right? Literally to comprehend, right? You go around it. If a finite human mind could go around the infinite, well then that's by definition not infinite in some sense. And that you, by some sense, wouldn't be finite. And so if a human being is finite, well there is going to be a real sense in the fact that you couldn't completely comprehend specifically what? God. But that seems to make sense. That, well, wait a minute, if God is God, if God is, right, if God exists, well then in a weird sort of paradoxical way, it's a comfort knowing that you can't comprehend that completely. Now again, if somebody were listening that was an atheist, a cop-out, I see they're saying that, no, we're not saying this. You toss out logic or that it's completely incomprehensible, everything about, nobody's saying that. We're just talking about the nature of God, not God's plan or God's word or any of these other sorts, or that God defies logic. We're not saying anything like that. We're just saying that God is not illogical, but his nature does go beyond our logical grasp, right? It's not against logic, but it's beyond our ability, right, to grasp. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
At least in some sense, no pun
Basically,
intended.
if you could understand everything God is and who He is, and you could be God, it could be like equal to them.
Right, and then he wouldn't be God. Then it wouldn't be God. You'd be talking about some Mormon version of God.
Because they said, it's three independent.
Right.
Separate.
Right, because see, here's all the cults go after the Trinity, all of them. Like if you can get the Trinity down, especially, and here's an important part, right? Kind of tangential of our subject, but really important. If you can defend the Trinity biblically, you're ready for any conversation with anybody that knocks on your door. The JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, or the Mormons, even a secular humanist, right? If they say things like Jesus never claimed to be God, all those sorts of things. Because they all of them will go after the Trinity. Mormons go after the Trinity in saying there's three, but there's not one. Right? Jehovah's Witnesses go after the Trinity in saying there's one, there's not three. Right? Muslims go after the Trinity, there's one, but not three. Obviously, secular humanists go after the Trinity in the sense that Jesus is not divine. Right? So if you can defend that position scripturally, you're ready for any one of those groups. Because that's where that's where the attack always goes. And why, again, why? Well, because again, Jesus made some radical claims. Radical claims. And I actually, in all the Bibles that I own, that I carry around, you wouldn't have to do this now. You could just print it out, it'd be a lot easier. But I used to write out all of those, write out all the scriptures that reveal that teach that there's one God. And then I wrote out all the scriptures that teach that Jesus is God, right? Where he claims these titles for God himself in the New Testament. Then I wrote out all the scriptures where the Holy Spirit is deemed as God, right? And then obviously the Father. I mean, that one's easy. But I have and then any Bible I get, I would write those in the front flap. All of that stuff, every time, right? So that when Jehovah's Witnesses came or Mormons came or whoever at the door, I could literally just get my Bible, walk right out there, and I've got it all right there every time. And now I've got all that printed out, like on or like in a Google Doc or something, and I can send it to you, and you can just print it out, literally laminate it, and have it sitting in your Bible. If you want to say that too, most of that came out of. Well, you could probably get that in. Again, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist book. But where I got most of it was what I don't have enough faith to be an atheist book was based on, and that was Norman Geisler's original text, which was called Christian Apologetics. And that was just a much more in-depth material of basically the same stuff. But in fact, I'm almost 100% positive that's where I got most of that general layout, was out of that. But yeah, you could probably get the majority of that out of it. That's why it's just such a good little resource, man. It's just a great little resource, that little book. So much material in there. Now, the danger of that is when you try to cover that much ground, you can't go into as much depth, but it's still just a great resource to use. So what else is on y'all's mind?
Kind of talked about it afterward, Eric and I, but do you have any other thoughts about